Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for this next session. I'm Colin McKenzie. I'm a fellow at the Natural Resource Users Law and Policy Center at the University of Arizona, which is a collaboration of Cooperative Extension and the College of Law. And I have the real pleasure of joining in conversation our two amazing panelists, Mary Walker from Freeport-McMoRan and Professor Dr. Nathalie Risso from the Mining Engineering Department here at the University of Arizona. So before going any further on this topic of the role of artificial intelligence in terms of building collaborative innovation or building collaboration and innovation in mining, I'm just going to turn it back over to Nathalie.
Well, my name is Nathalie Risso. I am an assistant professor with the School of Mining and Geological Engineering at the University of Arizona since 2022. I am originally from Chile, the largest copper producer in the world. And I think that's kind of like a defining thing for me, being in mining in particular. So my background is in electronics, actually, and I work on mine automation and autonomous systems. My research interests go along the integration of technology in the mining industry and how you can basically make mining improve economic development.
Okay, my name is Mary Amelia Walker. My friends call me Leah, so hopefully you can call me Leah during this interview. I have been in the mining industry for a while. I have a pretty broad portfolio of experiences. I'm a scientist and a mathematician by education. Love the mining industry. Have had a ton of opportunities to do a lot of really interesting work. Most recently, in the past 15 plus years, laser focused on this idea of data-driven innovation in mining and in the organization that I work for, and building standard data systems that allow us to then put this great technology on top of that to innovate and build a portfolio of innovations. I consider myself to be an inventor. I consider myself to be an innovator, and I'm very happy to be here to talk about what I think is super important to our industry in the future.
Great. Well, if our chatting before we got going with this is any indication, I'm really looking forward to the conversation with the two of you. And I just wanted to give a quick version of how we came to be in conversation along these lines. And long story short is, as this year's summit on the topic of the future of mining in terms of the technical and political landscape, as the subtitle of this year's summit would have it. This year's the 10th annual. So both the political landscape and the technical landscape, as I see them, sort of are, it's an interdependent function. And so when John Lacey and I sort of were going back and forth on some of the original ideas that we'd frame out with this summit in conversation with our panelists and interviewees, this notion of technology and innovation in mining came to the fore. And I'll just share that really it was a mining and natural resources attorney, graduate of the University of Arizona College of Law by the name of Marion Lalonde, who I hope I'm not speaking out of school saying this, shared with John Lacey the notion that it would be a worthwhile focus to focus on technology in the mining industry in this day and age. And there's just so much there. And so as I was sort of trying to get up to speed on that, I come from a hydrogeology background, a engineering background, open pit dewatering background, for example, in Chile at a large open pit copper mine in the north. Lived for a few years in Iquique. So it's very nice to be in conversation with you, Nathalie. Very good memories of Chile. In any case, this notion came about of, what is that connection exactly between technology and mining? And again, there's a lot there. And I came across the Global Mining Guidelines Group that had a 2019 white paper put out, Foundations of AI in Mining. I also came across sort of a separate version of that kind of white paper put out in 2025 by Microsoft, of all things, which also recalls, right now that I think about it, a book called The Atlas of AI by, I'm blocking on the author's name, but it's the Atlas of AI, and there's a professor at USC who also holds a position at Microsoft, who really unpacked a lot of the sort of material dimensions of AI. And so between the white paper and mining from the GMG group, I listened to everything that that group put out. There's a great set of webinars, et cetera, available on YouTube. And so I saw that Leah here, as of a year or two ago, joined up with them, separate from her day job, as a, what would you say, what would be your...
So the GMG group has several work streams, and I've actually been involved with them for about 10 years. The first work stream that I have been involved with is this idea of standard data systems, right? How do you have standard time models? How do we understand how to talk to each other in the mining industry using the same language? And then, of course, as we've been down this journey, the idea of technology and innovation and AI is a very important topic, and so joined up as with the GMG group to put together information that we feel is important as an industry around what are we trying to do with this thing called AI, and how do we understand the impacts, and how do we share, and how do we learn from each other.
Great. Yeah, so that sort of led to being in touch with you, Leah, and also with Dr. Risso, who, as part of your research portfolio, you're teaching your research agenda, your teaching portfolio. I understand that you're working in collaboration, at least in part, with Freeport-McMoRan on issues of training and education for the industry in terms of machine learning applications, et cetera. So that was sort of how we all came together to sketch up this session. And just before we started talking, this notion came about of, why this topic, why at a summit on mining law? And in my view, and just as sort of a placeholder, something to put a pin in, is this notion of governance. All the decisions that are made in the industry, and there's a whole network of stakeholders that comprise the industry. It's not monolithic. And so there's a variety of types of decisions that are made: financial, legal, operational, compliance, et cetera. And so that was one thought to just get the conversation going, is how decisions are made is sort of my working definition of governance, and that's sort of a subset of the law. And so I just want to ask the two of you sort of how you came to think of the topic for this particular session in terms of that connection between technology, AI, innovation, and collaboration with respect to your vantage point in academia as experts, but also in industry.
To me, it resonates a lot. So we have two sayings in Chile about mining. The first one is very popular. It says that $1 out of $3 that are in our economy comes from mining. So mining is extremely important and everyone knows it. And the second one is actually stated in mining policy. And it says mining is an engine for innovation. And I completely agree with that. I have participated in the creation of the new mining policy in Chile from academia. And I think getting the input of everyone, of all of the stakeholders in this decision-making framework is super important, particularly when you are thinking about fostering innovation for the industry. I think here in the United States, and particularly in Arizona, because we are so close to industry, we have a unique opportunity of creating innovation ecosystems that take advantage of this technology and basically build, progress.
And so just to build on that, I brought a few notes so that I'd be sure not to forget anything. Why? I think the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, why do we innovate? Why should we innovate, right? And there's so many new reasons for us as a mining industry to embrace change. And one, there's production challenges, there's personnel challenges, right? We have a new workforce that works differently, that thinks differently, right? We have supply chain, issues that we have to face on. We have things like cost and sustainability that are so important to the mining industry. We want to also understand how we support economic growth. And so, first of all, you have to understand why you want to innovate, and then you have to understand how to innovate and what to innovate. And I think that's a really important way for us to understand governance.
And so just a quick question before I move in a slightly different direction. What does that mean for you, Leah, in terms of your job as innovation lead at Freeport? If you had to encapsulate in a sentence or a few sort of what that means for you and your role, for you and your team, and for your company, what does that look like when you zoom as far out as you might?
Because we're in a new world, right? You have to understand how to do things differently, and that's what innovation is all about. Right, and for me, I come at this story from a lens of standard data systems, and how do you understand standard data systems and how do you understand how to build standard data systems so that then you can put all this great innovation on top of that, and then how do you understand the intellectual property associated with what you innovate from the standard data systems, and then how do you execute that in a collaborative way across the industry? And when I say the industry, I mean, there's a lot of support processes in the industry. Mining is an incredibly innovative industry that brings a bunch of different factors into play.
I wanted to actually add a little bit to that. So there is this company in Chile, Antofagasta Minerals, you may be familiar with them. So they have this program that is called Innova Minerals. And they has a systematic way to identify the challenges, and then they post the challenges for people to basically, create solutions. And that makes a lot of sense to me in terms of the participation, because the hardest part is understanding the problems.
Yes.
So they go like from the mine, from the pit up.
Yes.
Building, what is needed. And then from that they say, we have this problem, this is what we try. We would like solutions that go around this line. And that's open to everyone to apply. So either if you are like a startup, innovation company, research center, etc. I find that very interesting, because I think it connects all the people in this flow.
And so that actually goes back to the conversation of governance, right? So many people have wonderful ideas, and that's what you have to capture. Then how do you understand what to do from there, right? How do you understand what's the next step, and then how do you understand how to measure success? And how do you know that what you're choosing will help you change the way you do your business in a positive and cost-effective manner?
Yeah, and all of that in a very complex system, right? I mean, and even putting it in terms of complex system, I feel like risks simplifying the matter and being sort of reductionistic about it. But what occurs to me now is whether you're talking in the realm of sustainability, sustainable development, human rights issues, for example, the historic legacy of mining, all of the above. What's interesting about that model, if you might call it that, from Antofagasta Minerals, is that it speaks to like a hub model, and I'm curious, and before I actually ask this question, I'll just say that the way the rest of this panel interview will go is that there's sort of three ideas that I hope will come around to having some sense of, some articulation of. That is, data as a very new material relevant aspect of IP in the mining industry, and then second, what sorts of legal frameworks are relevant to this context of innovation and data applications and AI and machine learning in the industry and all these different facets, and then also workforce development, as has been pointed out, in the era of AI. And so I wanted to put a pin in it on that sort of hub model. What I recall is the mining engineering department, and also the School of Mining, Engineering, and Mineral Resources at the U of A, having submitted, I think within this past year, was a big NSF grant, which I understand was not ultimately funded, but it was a very big package that really spoke to that kind of hub model. I'm not sure the extent to which you might have been involved in that.
I was.
Okay.
I was
Could you speak to that, what that looked like, and its relevance to this discussion? Because I think there's a lot there, even if it wasn't ultimately funded in that particular sense. Because I recall it being sort of a very holistic hub model?
Yeah, well, I think the idea was basically to bring people around innovation in mining to create economic development in the region. And you have a lot of the ingredients on the table here in Arizona in particular, because you have the mining companies, you have many of the providers, you have a lot of people who have created companies that provide services to mining. You have communities that are very involved with the industry because they are working for the industry, or they are sort of like facing the mines being in their backyard, and they are concerned about that. So there are like a lot of issues that are relevant. So that project unfortunately wasn't funded, but I had a lot of fun when we were creating that, because we got to meet with everyone. We got to meet with the communities, government representatives from industry, and we got to sit together and basically single out the things that we believe were important to create this economic development and to foster innovation and to take advantage of new technologies in the sense of what they are, which is tools. So once the wheel was invented, people were obviously not transporting stuff, by foot anymore. So in here, I think it's the same approach. We have these tools. How can we use them to tackle the big challenges and create sustainable development at the end? So I think that was kind of like the essence of the project. And I think in spirit, we continue working on that, even though not under the umbrella of that project anymore, but it's very intrinsic to what the School of Mining is doing nowadays.
And that is really a fundamental philosophy for Freeport-McMoRan, is it's very much how do we all work together to solve these problems, because it takes all of us, the community and all of the experts that are in the industry every day to solve these problems, along with academia.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's a collaborative model. It's a very, very powerful way to solve problems.
I also think that it's super important there, like the stakeholder acknowledgement. So I am trained as an electrical engineer, and I feel like as an electrical engineer, you have like a lot of rigor on technical background. But when I took classes in mining, actually, I learned to think in 3 dimensions: economic, social, and environmental. And I don't think that's something that comes to people's mind very often. So when you think about innovating and creating positive impact in communities, you need to be very aware of your stakeholders. Yeah. And we try to bring that into our curriculum. So we have our students from the mining department, from the mining school, for instance, going to the high schools, talking to students, talking to professors about their experience. Many of them are interns from Freeport, actually, and they have had pretty cool experiences, and they are happy to share them. So I feel like that helps us build, kind of like an inertia around mining to get things going.
It's really interesting you mentioned that, because you mentioned 3D, 3 dimensions. There's a professor out of University of Delaware who's then recently gone to University of Wisconsin by the name of Julie Klinger, who's great. She's trained as a geography, I believe, out of UC Berkeley. And maybe there was some environmental aspect to her dissertation work, but she did a ton of field work over many years, studying rare earths, that field work being done in China, right? And another of our panelists for this summit, Stephen Fleming, who talks about space mining, when we got to chatting, he really quickly got this notion that rare earths aren't necessarily rare. That just took back in, I think, the 18th century, this notion they were rare, because at the time they were apparently rare. In any case, Stephen mentioned that the real issue is that it's particularly dirty to mine rare earths, and that's why, for various geopolitical reasons and historical reasons in the 20th century, that was essentially offshored to China. And so Dr. Julie Klinger has this concept of, she calls it critical raw materials in subterranean and orbital dimensions. So connecting the subterranean, the geological, and orbital, which also in my mind, and so the 4D for her is time, implicating history, implicating a lot of stuff that time might implicate in many different analytic dimensions. And she's one of the sort of more really trenchant, tractable thinkers on a lot of these issues, which are so multidimensional. And so I thought that's interesting. You started thinking about it in 3D. Dr. Klinger talks about mining and minerals and all that in 4D, and then also the sort of national security dimension. What a critical minerals. And so I just want to, please jump in, Leah, and Dr. Risso. But I know now, 2025, the University of Arizona has a new big sort of strategic research initiative in the realm of the future of sustainable mining and critical minerals, and another of the 4 major strategic initiatives at the moment being in space and national security. So it's all of a piece.
And I mean, and that's really what's so exciting, right? That is why we're sitting here, because what you're talking about, the mining industry is critical to many of those dimensions, and it's very, very critical for us to understand that and talk about it and be collaborative with it to solve problems.
Yeah, I think also, on the time dimension that you mentioned, that's something that is a challenge for us here. So people's perception of mining is not always the best. Typically when you say mining, they picture like the coal miner, like from old times. And they don't necessarily think that mining equals innovation. It equals technology, and it equals an opportunity for development. And I think that's a message we also want to put out there with sort of like being in this conversation.
I think that's very important. That's what we're saying. So if we're going to talk about innovation in the mining industry and how we understand how to be collaborative, the biggest thing to communicate is the mining industry is incredibly innovative. We've been innovative for 200 years.
My students always get surprised. Well, not my students, actually. The students, like when I talk to high schools, when I tell them that the first autonomous vehicles were actually from mining.
That's right.
And I love that they started in Chile, actually, but it was a collaboration from Modular Mining, now Komatsu, and one of the Chilean mining companies. So it also talks about like the global impacts of, creating things for mining that will have an impact worldwide and that will affect not only getting the materials and the minerals, but also the economy and the quality of life of people.
Which is how we started, right? Why do we innovate? What are the needs and the reasons to innovate? And infrastructure is one of them. How do we impact infrastructure and the economies of the world? And that's one of the reasons that's so important to innovate.
Yeah, and I'm just flashing on a quote. I don't mean to be so anecdotal and ad hoc with all of this, but there's a really great water law scholar out of Kansas by the name of Burt Griggs. He's done a lot of interstate water litigation, very, very great thinker. But he really understands resource issues in a way that's coupled with how law can lend itself to thinking through these complex issues. And, as we're talking, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, how does anyone get anything done in this complex area, right? Because there's just so much there. So it would be easy to get overwhelmed, and maybe that's just me, but how do you get things done? And so having, done my undergraduate in the College of Engineering and Mines at the U of A when it was called that, that's, I think if you had to say what engineering was, in essence, it's problem solving, right?
Yes.
And so, but nonetheless, I admire engineers now that I'm no longer one, I guess you could say, because they have this notion of getting stuff done. Right, solutions, and the more that the older I get, the more uncomfortable I get with the notion of solutions, because it's never a full solution. It's never.
That's right.
And there's always issues. And so Burt Griggs had this notion in a recent paper of, it's more important. He's paraphrasing someone. It's more important to have a few good questions than all the answers. So I just want to sort of maybe share that as my orienting perspective for the rest of this conversation of, what are some of those outstanding questions, or the questions that in your work and your amongst your teams and all the different collaborations you both have going on, what are some of those questions that kind of bug you?
I think before we go into what bugs me, I think it's really important to say that, honoring the fact that we have dynamic problems, dynamic issues, we have dynamic, complicated things to solve, right? I think that we should understand that we should keep it simple. To me, I talk a lot to people about that. I honor the fact that this work is complicated and we're all smart and we're all capable of solving complex problems. But if you can keep it simple and focus on the vital few and understand what it is you're trying to solve from that perspective, you can get things done together. And so I often find when we're talking about collaboration, we're talking about innovation, and we're talking about all these words, right? It's all about we're just trying to solve a simple problem. And if we can do that, then we can shift and move in a collaborative manner.
So I think I'm having.
Should we go into the topics?
No, exactly. We get sidetracked by the interesting stuff, but getting back to.
Well, actually, it's kind of like at the core of this. So the first topic we had was data as the new IP. And that's a concept that's very intrinsically related to stakeholders. So obviously, like artificial intelligence and machine learning rely on data and data infrastructures. And those have different owners. So you have the mining companies, you have the providers who build equipment, you have, companies who provide software services. So when data is created, who owns it? And when you try to build something with that, how should that be performed, deployed, I guess.
And so what does that look like from your perspective, Leah? That IP angle, I know that's right up your alley. What are some of the implications?
You have to solve two problems. One is how do you understand what is the IP that you're building, and then how do you understand how to collaborate using data? That's actually, again, this how do you keep it simple, right? It's incredibly complex. You're talking about providers, right? And so how do you collaborate with providers to shift and change and grow in a way that honors their technology and your technology? And it's very much there's lots to understand around how the data has become the new commodity, and how you have to understand how you describe the use of data in contractual interactions.
So that begs the question, if you're framing it, the argument is that data in this context is the new IP in the mining industry. What relevance does that have? What implications does that question have, or that framing have? And then also, what did it used to be? If this is the new IP, what was the old IP, and what might we get out of that sort of paradigm change?
Actually, I think that what you're saying is right. So the operating data that we've had has always been an operator's intellectual property, right? But the situation now is we have open data systems, and now we have open sharing, and now in order to solve these problems, in order to do things like put AI on top or machine learning on top, you have to share.
And so by operator, you mean presumably the mine operator.
The operating any operation, like you can use the mining operation data, but if you're trying to build a car that drives remotely, you have to have the operating data from that car in order to understand how to build a car that operates, right? There's some base innovation associated with that, and then you have to grow on top of that.
I think it's a little bit easier for us from academia because we partner up with industry, like the mining industry, but we also partner up with providers and startups. So in general, we try to help creating IP. So to me, that would be like the recipe for solving the problem. But the ingredients come from different sources. And the problems also have different stakeholders that you need to consider. So when we work with industry, we basically try to help them solve a problem using, the latest technology, the latest science that we are working with at the university. But then we are not a company that provides the service of creating, a system, a sensor, a software that Freeport can use. So that's an opportunity for the providers, for, the startups to go in, take this, package it, develop it, but they need to collaborate with the client to do so. So that brings immediately this concept of, integration of different people with different interests and backgrounds.
And that's where you start to get the lines become a little blurry around this thing called intellectual property.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Particularly because data it's the power of data in today's universe.
Yeah, and you need it. Like basically AI and machine learning is like let the data tell you how things are going. And
Yeah. So, okay, yeah, and it's fascinating to have that conversation at a public land-grant university, and I say land-grant in particular because the mission of a land-grant university, speaking of cooperative extension and land-grant universities, historically, the mission is to bring the university to the people, and also the mission of a university of generating new knowledge, which is, exactly where academia fits into this puzzle, and into a puzzle of a very real world with real people, real impacts, real needs of enterprise and capital, et cetera. And so it's really interesting to think of the university in terms of that the research and development component, R&D, and how that process can be iterated back and forth. And I feel like that's kind of a sweet spot in terms of where the two of you are coming from and where that comes together. And I'm just trying to think of, your, not pet projects, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, actually, that, being here in Arizona again reinforces the notion of a big opportunity for creating, innovation and making a difference. Because you have different minds that have different challenges. And when you're trying to create solutions will need some tuning, some adaptation. So some companies provide those services, and there is a place in the market for them. And as they jump into this sort of like process of building a solution that is going to be of full benefit, then you are actually, improving the economy and the development of that region. Even further, like I have seen a lot of innovations that started in mining and then moved to things like agriculture, or like water.
Or vice versa.
Yeah.
So there's great innovations in agriculture that we learn from for mining, right? And so you have to understand how powerful it is to collaborate, and also how we're talking about mining law is why we're here, right? And you also have to understand how powerful it is to collaborate and how that collaboration and innovation becomes a commodity. So even for the universities, right? For the universities, for the startups, for the providers, for the mining companies, it's a very exciting time that we're in terms of how do we understand how to keep up with innovation.
Well, and speaking of which, right, I think in this day and age, and maybe in a variety of sectors, it's hard just to keep up, right? That's its own challenge. And how do you navigate that? And at some point in the GMG group, Global Mining Guidelines group, webinars that I listened to over the past 5 years preparing for this, you could do way worse than to check those out to kind of study up to get a big picture sense of what's going on. But if you look at aspects of, for example, digital twinning, I'll add the ing, make it a gerund, but digital twinning, I know there was a big push of Freeport's at their Baghdad operations now, probably 5 or 6 years ago. And I just had a conversation last Friday with a former colleague who's in the hydrogeology consultant space, and it just happened to come up, that background of Baghdad's digital twinning, which I didn't really get until I went through all the GMG group webinars on technology and AI, and sort of more foundationally data applications in mining, and all of that all that is unlocked there, and then sort of taking these different angles, one of which would be sort of a stakeholder lens or a sustainability lens. I was fascinated a few years ago, the webinar with GMG, it was either IBM or Siemens. I think it was IBM, and maybe Siemens has a version. They have a marketplace for these kinds of products, digital twins of a bunch of different aspects of stuff that you can digitally twin and then go with in terms of optimization and planning and decision making, and getting back to that sort of legal lens of governance, how decisions are made. I just find that fascinating, and to use that marketplace dimension as a manner of like refining the problems, refining the solutions, refining the ideas, thinking through these things in a more refined way. And that's something we do as lawyers, is we issue spot, and then the more refined you can get on what's really at issue, ideally, that would be the lawyer's sort of contribution, is to move this thing forward, this whole enterprise and decision-making forward in a way that's tractable, legally defensible, bottom line compliant, and not just bottom line compliant, but doing the over and above that a lot of companies are committing to. But the over and above what's bottom line required is kind of a gray area. So how do you operate in that space? And that sort of classic notion of fiduciary duty, fiduciary responsibility in a corporate setting, there's a body of law there that can help structure that thinking. I think that's one of the law's sort of mechanisms or tools it can bring to bear, is structuring, sort of giving some social order, right, in what can otherwise be, a hot mess, because, there is, human nature is mirrored in a lot of what humans do: industry, commerce, international relations, social, civil society. And so I guess coming back to sort of this tech aspect and how to use a legal framework to think that through, ideally not bog things down. The lawyers can have a bad reputation for just bogging stuff down, for asking too many questions, slowing things down. So in terms of what that looks like for your work, Leah, at Freeport, for example, that innovation and what are the kinds of conversations you all are having with your attorneys, and how might that look different in terms of collaboration in this very innovative space? I know I just laid a lot out there.
That's a very tricky question.
So I'll just have to say that I've had the pleasure in my career to work with some of the most amazing legal patent lawyers ever, the smartest people I've ever met, these gentlemen, right? And it's all about the art of the possible, and it's all about how do you protect the art of the innovation. How do you protect it's all about the art, and how do you protect the art of the innovation?
Ideas.
How do you protect the art of the innovation? Right, and that is the work. So I have a suite of patents from innovative ideas, leveraging this idea of data-driven innovation. Right, how do you understand the health of your equipment from the information that comes from your equipment, and how do you manage your operations to be more effective and to lower your cost, your cost profile, and how do you do all of that? Those are really big concepts.
So I know we've been talking for a while now, and I think we could all talk forever, but we have to fit this into a certain time slot. But go for it.
I wanted to fit it in with the last piece, which is workforce development.
Yeah,
so
yes.
So and actually share. So I think the first time I talked to Leah face to face was during one of the SME conferences when I was a student, and I was actually writing my first patent. And I have to say, I have no idea at the point, so she provided some very insightful guidelines at the time. But I think we also need to have a challenge here, a challenge for preparing people for this, for navigating the legal framework, the collaboration, the innovation, the integration, and the technology part.
That's exactly what we're talking about.
Because a lot of people, a lot of students, they are not necessarily taught, what's IP. When you have an idea, how do you, make it happen? So when I had my first patent, my plan was to send it to a conference and get it, get a presentation there. And I talked to one of the professors, and he said, you're crazy, this is a patent. Go make it happen.
It's how do you protect the art of the possible? Exactly. It's exactly what we're talking about. And it's because we live in a day and age when the art of the possible is all around us. How do we understand what is innovative and new intellectual property? It's a very interesting concept, and I believe teaching students about how to understand that is very important as they navigate in the next 30 years of what's going to happen in our world.
And I think it's particularly important, for our students in the mining school and,
yes.
At the University of Arizona, because most of the people here end up working directly for a mining company or a company that is somehow providing services to mining. Mm-hmm. And when you think about where innovation is coming from, is from understanding the problems and what's missing.
That's exactly right.
And when they have the technical knowledge to understand what's missing, but they also know how to make that into IP and how to find, the partners.
How to fill the gap of what's missing, yes.
Exactly, right. And then finally, to move that forward into the tech transfer to create actually a product that can be useful. So I always say that I am an engineer to use science and technology to help improve people's lives. And the only way for doing that is to take an idea and turning it into a solution that is going to be available for everyone to use. Mm-hmm. So that process, I think we need to integrate it into the curriculum in the universities to better prepare students to be innovators and to create their own IP.
Well, and I know that's an issue that the School of Mining, Engineering, and Mineral Resources was originally set out as the new entity that it is. Arizona obviously is not new in training mining engineers, but in this new iteration of the industry, you might say, with the sort of demand-driven workforce issue, for mines to keep producing, there's that workforce issue, right? Yeah. And I know that's something you all have looked at and you're looking at, but it really broadens the notion of what, for example, is a mining engineer, I think.
That's exactly what we're talking about, I think, right? And so, we could have a whole nother 45-minute conversation about, how do we help people understand that the mining industry is an incredibly innovative industry. If you want to be science, technology, engineering, math, it's computer science, it's engineering, it's electrical engineering, it's electricians, it's everyone who understands how to innovate and think and solve problems working together. It's a very powerful community.
Not least issues surrounding social license, indigenous rights, and
there's
all of that.
Yes, there's so many pillars of where you can impact.
Exactly, and the reason I bring that up, sort of thought occurs to me, is that another of our panelists, I mentioned him before, Stephen Fleming, used to have a senior research administrator role at the U of A. And in that sense, he was involved in an NSF quantum computing multi-university consortium. And a former U of A law professor, James Bambauer, was working on that in terms of the governance and societal impacts that were on the horizon implicated by research in the that quantum space. And it's fascinating because listening to one of Professor Bambauer's talks from 2023 or so, she was talking about one of many, applications of quantum computing, for example, as high fidelity remote sensing. I'm probably getting the language wrong. High fidelity Earth sensing, and in my mind, seeing where the gaps are to work, those in between spaces. Immediately when Professor Bambauer raised the notion of, there could be tensions, and certainly maybe tensions in that data application space with respect to indigenous rights. And one of many cross-campus collaborative projects going on now is this notion of an indigenous data sovereignty, a project that has faculty from the College of Public Health, the Udall Center for Public Policy, the law school, and so all these different angles, and it's the in-between space that, at least from my perspective, there's a lot of really interesting action, governance, IP, data, sort of what counts, who's talking to whom about what, and so there's just a lot there. And so I personally found it very nice to hear Senior Vice President Dr. Tomas Diaz de la Rubia in providing some introductory remarks on these new current strategic research initiatives on critical minerals, mining, space, national security, et cetera, is he made a plug for the relevance of the humanities. Humanities in the time of AI. Interpretation, what does this stuff mean?
Yes.
Having conversations.
That's this whole idea behind data-driven innovation, right? What in the world does that mean?
And how do you make sense of it?
Yes, that's exactly right. And then the other thing that's super important is that you have to have smart people in between the data and the information. And so we have to remember that this is all still people-driven. These are people in process. Driven.
I think that calls again back to what's the new, mining engineer, what's the profile of people working in industry. I think at this point you need to know what you do, your discipline very well, but it's also kind of expected that you know additional things that can sort of like bring your discipline to the next stage, like innovation procedures. I always tell my students, innovation is not like divine inspiration that comes.
It's not magic.
No, exactly.
I say that all the time. It's just not magic. It's just a lot of hard work and thinking.
Exactly. So that, and also, knowing about technology. So new technologies should be in all of the programs. I think people from social science, people from law, people from engineering, they all should know, AI capabilities, what you can and you cannot do with that. And then use it as a tool, as we use, computers and cell phones and everything to do what we are intended to do. And that's, the work of people. That's the way I see it.
Well, so we unfortunately don't have an unlimited time. I know, Dr. Risso, you have somewhere to be in a few minutes. So I just want to end with sort of a final question, trying to tie things together, which is that this notion that the Global Mining Law Center at the U of A, at the College of Law, was founded. Its core mission is to educate miners on legal issues and educate lawyers on mining issues. And that's not a simple matter. The issues aren't simple. There's a professor out of the University of Dundee, Ana Bastida. She talks about mining law, if you were to treat it as an academic discipline. It's something like a matrix of disciplines involved. There's a whole matrix of folks and disciplines involved. So what is it to educate miners on legal issues and educate lawyers on mining issues? So that's my question for you as sort of a placeholder. What would you highlight as something that either a lawyer or a miner, quote unquote, ought to have on their radar screen from your vantage point? And I'll just kick things off. Dr. Julie Klinger's work I find fascinating. I mentioned that briefly earlier. She talked about the a geographer at Wisconsin, studies rare earths, and I think as we talked about just before we started recording, she had the 4D aspect, the critical raw materials in 4 dimensions, subterranean and orbital dimensions. So that's what I would throw out there as something that would be both relevant to lawyers and miners, metaphorically speaking, miners and lawyers. Same question for you, if you could just maybe put something out there for our audience.
I think, for engineers, definitely the law is, the framework, the rules in which that apply to the game in which you're moving. So definitely something you need to be very aware of. I also think, this innovation and AP, I don't think really engineers are necessarily, or mining people are necessarily aware of that. We need to put it on the table. On the other hand, like from someone who is into law and tries to understand mining, I think mining is so broad. It covers so many disciplines, so many aspects. It affects people in such different ways. So I think understanding basically the mining process, but across the dimensions, with a strong emphasis on what this means to people. It means, my job. It means, maybe like noise if I'm living nearby a mining operation. It means, a source for research, for innovation, and for creating new things. So that's my take on that, I think.
Thanks, that's great.
I think that I want to say again is, how do you protect the art of the possible? And how do you understand that what we're doing is developing new innovation and new ways of doing our business, because we're a mining company and we're in the business of making money, right? And how do you understand how that fits in to all the different pillars that we spoke about today? There's the social aspect, there's the innovation aspect, there's the how do we collaborate aspect, there's the providers, there's the academic input. How does the legal field help to keep us supported as we understand the path forward in the art of the possible?
Yeah. Well, I think that speaks to, in my view, a sort of a tension between collaboration and the
Yes, that's right.
exigencies of private sector enterprise in terms of competitive advantage, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that that core tension is not necessarily resolvable with any easy answers. And like I mentioned earlier, that this paraphrase of a quote from Burke Griggs, which is that it's better to have some good questions than all the answers. So with that tension between collaboration and kind of competitive advantage, I guess, out there, to acknowledge that, and it raises more questions than it does give us answers. I think that's okay. That's good, and it'll be a good point that we can put a pin in to now turn it over to our host John Lacey, who will moderate some questions and answers.
Thank you, Colin, and Leah and Nathalie, and Tim Snyder is back with us also, and as is Colin. The Leah or Nathalie. Here's Nathalie right here. We appreciate your hanging around for a little bit here. We promised to meet your schedule. You know what? One thing that occurs to me, principally listening to Leo's comments, is that artificial intelligence may be smarter than we are. And it strikes me that the whole idea of artificial intelligence is to cut to the chase, is to see where the truth lies, and be able to navigate our way through answers that make sense in the long run. The question that I put to Nathalie really was, and feel free to jump in on it too, that maybe artificial intelligence is smarter than we are, and its ability to cut to the chase and find that truth that we're seeking to combine in the overall scheme of things, and to work from that standpoint. Either one of you want to wade in on that one?
I can do that. I actually would like to offer a different perspective. So recently, the concept of Industry 5.0 has gained a lot of relevance, in research, in conferences. And Industry 5.0 basically means humans collaborating with technology to improve development across all dimensions. So I think that concept resonates a lot to me in what we do at the university, and also at looking at artificial intelligence as a tool that sort of like enables you to expand your senses and to give you a tool to navigate all of the data that you have nowadays, because things change so fast. There are so many sources of information. There is so much data, and it's very difficult for one person just to understand what's there. So rather than a smarter alternative, I look at AI as an aid for us to do things in a more comprehensive manner, and that help us sort of like synthesize a little bit of all of this surrounding world of data in which we are immersed now. I don't know what's your take on that, Leah.
I agree. I also believe you have to have smart people in between the data and the information. So we have to always remember that.
I thought this was a great conversation. I think Leah and I worked together about 100 years ago. Is that right, Leah?
In a land far, far away, in a time long, long ago.
I think we were talking about the same thing back then. But,
that's right. This is great fun. This is fun stuff.
Absolutely. Well, my comment, just following up on John's comment about the AI brings a different level of capability. I think what it will do let me pick an area of mine planning, for example. Mine planning is an iterative process. And so we take available data and we take a shot at building a mine plan, either short term or long term. And then we do iterations to improve it. AI is going to be, I think, like having 100 mine planners working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, never taking a coffee break or anything like that, and therefore can do those iterations much more rapidly and much more precisely. And so our whole understanding of uh, of data and so forth, I think is something that's going to change. And with the end result being that we're going to be able to exploit these resources, these mines, much more effectively and increase productivity. And of course, the world needs that. And so I believe that we're going to get an increment of additional copper production out of the Southwest U.S. or and around the world, just as a result of being able to uh, analyze and act on the data, and that goes all the way from exploration and or estimation, mineral processing, metallurgy, water usage. You can go all the way down the line, and a result of it, I think, is that the future engineers and geologists and metallurgical people and so forth are going to have to it's going to be a different job in which we're making sure we can understand what the AI is doing for us and providing the data that it needs to make it as effective as possible. And that's a little different than what we have now. And so that goes back to what I like about the University of Arizona is a pretty fair forward-looking programs to give us our future engineers and geologists and so forth that hopefully are up to that. But I really hope that all the future engineers, all the students today are recognizing that, and it's going to be an exciting period, in my opinion. Now, I may be all wet on all of this, but it sure seems like we're heading that way. But one of the things we have been talking about here is, and Leah's mentioned it a time or two, is protecting the data or protecting the idea, and I love that. I think it's going to be more and more difficult from an intellectual property standpoint to protect anything going forward. And I'm not. I think it's always been difficult in the mining industry from an IP standpoint to be able to hold on to anything that you invent for very long before it's shared worldwide. And I wonder sometimes if we the industry should just uh, uh, be a lot more open and sharing because we all benefit. And I don't think there's going to be any, personally, I don't think we're going to be competing for markets. I think the markets are going to be able to take every single bit of copper or other minerals that we can make. And so, I think our idea of competition is going to be different going forward as well. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say. I could talk for a week about it, but I know we don't have the time.
I actually wanted
I
to,
think
sorry.
some of the major improvements in the computer industry has been made through open source information. I'm sorry, Nathalie, go ahead.
Yes, I actually wanted to tell Timothy about a project that we have. So Momo Mayes, Angelina Anani, and I are actually working on data-driven dynamic mine planning. And we
Yeah.
are looking at how to integrate the data into mine planning, but we are also looking at this from the perspective of doing different pilots across different mining operations to integrate people. So what we develop with AI is actually useful for them. So that's definitely something that is right, into what we are looking at right now.
Yeah, and I'm aware of a lot of that, and yeah, I know there's a lot of work being done on that. I think it's going to provide tremendous benefits.
Good. Well, Nathalie and Leah, thank you very much for the presentations and thank you, Tim, for jumping in on this too. We really appreciate your observations here too.
Thanks.
That being said, I think we're right on time for the what started out as our fifth topic,